Exactly. All right. Well, here we are at the end of the show. So let's take another quick look at the numbers for this morning. The Nikkei is down 0.3% to 20,455. Australia's ASX 200 index is down 0.9% this morning to 5,536. And Seoul's Kospi also down 0.1% to 2,105. Gold currently stands at $1,165 per ounce and Brent crude oil at $61.77. So we're here on a Friday. We are heading into a weekend. There is a Greek referendum coming up. What else should we have our eyes on, Tobias?
Anything exciting coming from China to throw some kitchen sink and other things at the declining market. And hopefully we're going to get Greece at least temporarily off the radar after this weekend. Vote yes, bye-bye Varoufakis. Opa.
All right. Thanks, Tobias. Tobias Hexter is an adjunct associate professor in the Department of Finance at the Chinese University of Hong Kong and a regular guest host on Money for Nothing. I'm Renita Malhotra Hora, wrapping up for this week's Money for Nothing, and a big thanks to our producer, Sandra Lam. Let's take a quick look at the weather forecast for today, which will be mainly fine, very hot during the day with a maximum temperature of around 33 degrees. Right now it's 30 degrees Celsius and the relative humidity is 80%. And here's the news with Sam Butler.
The British oil company BP has announced a huge settlement with the US Department of Justice following the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. The deal, under which the company will pay up to $18.7 billion will be the largest settlement paid by a single company in American history. Radio Australia's Michael Vincent reports.
The 2010 oil rig explosion sent 3 million barrels of crude oil into the Gulf. The spill wasn't stopped for almost 3 months. It washed up on the shores of 5 US states, destroying wildlife and habitats, and wrecked local businesses reliant on tourism. Governor of Alabama, Robert Bentley, announced the $25 billion deal.
This is a landmark settlement. It is designed to compensate the state for all of the damages, both environmental and economic, that was caused by this BP accident.
Today's settlement is on top of $57 billion BP set aside for criminal and civil cases as well as clean-up costs. The company can still face claims filed by affected individuals and businesses.
The death toll after a passenger ferry overturned in the central Philippines has risen to 38, with 20 people missing. Radio Australia's Shirley Escalante reports.
Search and rescue operations have continued after the overturned ferry MV Kim Nirvana was uprighted last night. The Philippines Coast Guard says the ferry overturned 300 meters from the central port of Ormoc after it was reportedly hit by huge waves. Survivors, however, say the ferry set sail in good weather. The Coast Guard says it will check the ferry's possible overloading as it was carrying more than 180 passengers and crew as well as sacks of rice and cement. President Benigno Aquino has ordered authorities to continue searching until all those reported missing have been accounted for.
The Islamic State group has released pictures showing its militants smashing what it says are statues from the ancient ruins in the Syrian city of Palmyra. The BBC's Alan Johnston reports.
In recent months, the militants have done terrible damage to ancient artifacts in their territory in Iraq. They've smashed pre-Islamic statues that they regard as idolatrous. And now they've released more images of long-haired fighters wielding sledgehammers as they destroy a series of carved marble figures. They say they found these treasures from Palmyra in the possession of a smuggler, and the militants seem to believe that this contraband needed to be destroyed.
You're listening to the news on RTHK.
Good morning and welcome to Backchat. I'm Danny Gittings. Your co-host this morning is Anna Fenton. Good morning, Anna.
Good morning.
Our main topic this morning, concerns over what impact China's new national security law might have on Hong Kong. It's the first time a Chinese law of this kind has mentioned Hong Kong, with the new law stating that the defense of national sovereignty, unity and territory is the duty of all Chinese people, including those living in Hong Kong. Hong Kong and mainland officials say the new law won't have any direct effect in Hong Kong. But press freedom groups and pro-democracy politicians have voiced fears the new law might still have an indirect impact. A report yesterday suggested that protesters who advocate independence at protests in Hong Kong might be arrested and prosecuted under the new law if they visit the mainland. There are also suggestions the new law is intended to put pressure on Hong Kong to restart the process of enacting Article 23 legislation. Chief Executive CY Leung says there are no plans to enact Article 23 legislation in the remainder of his present term. But his present term ends in less than 2 years' time. So will Article 23 be back on the agenda after that? What do you think? Email us with your thoughts. Our email address, backchat@rthk.hk. That's backchat@rthk.hk. Or you can go to our Facebook page, Backchat on RTHK Radio 3, and leave a comment there. Or you can give us a call. The number there, 233-88266. Or send us a text, 6393-5925. And later in the programme, we'll be asking Civic Party legislator Claudia Moe why she was one of only 2 legislators excluded by the government from Wednesday's events marking the anniversary of the handover. Joining us for the first segment of the discussion, we have Lawrence Ma, who is a barrister and chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation. We have Professor Joseph Cheng, who's convener of the Alliance for True Democracy and recently retired as professor at the Department of Public and Social Administration at City University of Hong Kong. And joining us in our Queensway studio, we have Gladys Lee, who is barrister and a member of the HK2020 pressure group. Good morning. Welcome to the show.
Good day.
Lawrence Ma, let's go to you first. Can you just explain a little bit about, especially for people not familiar with Chinese laws, about this new law? I mean, I was looking at it this morning. It's written in very, very general terms, isn't it? It's not what we in Hong Kong exactly would recognise as a law.
No. You're right, actually, Danny. Hong Kong legislations are very watertight, but the mainland legislations are more loosely drafted because any criminal obligations and liabilities would have to be found not in this national security law, but in the general criminal law. So it's different from our system.
And there's no actual punishments in this law, are there?
No, there's no. So therefore, you've got to go into the criminal law of the PRC to look for the criminal sanctions that's imposed.
However, there is a lot of very tough language. Would you accept that?
Yes, I think the law is quite strict, and it has reinstated a lot of premises to protect sovereignty, national unity, and the rule of the CCP.
And what's the motivation behind this law? I mean, why coming up with such a strong law at this time?
National security, because China, because of its development, has attracted foreign forces wanting to contain its development and using various means to do that. And one of the means is to have dismantle the Chinese Communist Party so that China might disintegrate.
Okay, we're discussing China's new national security law. You just heard Lawrence Ma, who's chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation. Let's now bring in Professor Joseph Cheng, who's former professor at the Department of Public and Social Administration at City University. Professor Cheng, what's your take on this new law?
Well, it has not much to do with Hong Kong initially. It has to do with the intention of the Chinese leadership to improve, first of all, coordination in the execution of foreign and defense policy. As you may remember, the Central Committee of the party in November 2013 decided to set up a National Security Commission. It was eventually set up in January 2014, headed by Xi Jinping himself. There is a lot of concern with the increasing importance of maintaining domestic security. As you can easily imagine, the expenditure on the maintenance of stability in China now exceeds that on the military. The National Security Commission also allows the integration of the military and the entire public security apparatus, including the Ministry of Public Security and National Security.
But Professor, if you read what it says about overseas security, it reads a bit like a mandate for quadrupling the size of the PLA.
Yes, this is exactly the point, because the Chinese leadership is increasingly concerned with the threat of domestic challenges ranging from the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, 1990, then the colored revolutions in the former Soviet republics, and then to the Arab Spring, which explain the tremendous expenditure on the maintenance of domestic stability. And of course, with the establishment of the National Security Commission, you also need a legal backing, a legal foundation, because after all, the National Security Commission is a party organ accountable to the Politburo and the Politburo Standing Committee. And as explained by our friend just now, typically the Chinese law comes in the form of general statements, general principles. And not only the court will then refer to the criminal law code, but also the government authorities will subsequently promulgate what they usually call implementation regulations, offering the details. At the same time, local governments at the provincial level also have the right to promulgate local legislation as well as to promulgate local governmental regulations on the detailed implementation of a large piece, of an important piece of legislation like the National Security Law.
Okay, now you said this law is not really about Hong Kong, but it does mention Hong Kong. There's two articles referring to Hong Kong. Let me just quickly read them out. Article 11 says, defending national sovereignty, unity and territorial completeness is the duty of all Chinese people, including those in Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan. Article 40 says, the Hong Kong SAR and Macau SAR should fulfill their responsibility of defending national security. What do you make of those references, Professor Cheng?
Well, upon the establishment of the National Security Commission, commentators in China, that is to say think tanks on foreign policy, on defense policy, they have already indicated that the policy organs responsible for Hong Kong and Macau affairs will be included within the framework of the National Security Commission. And hence, the National Security Law will also cover the Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan policy aspects. And it is no accident that in refusing to grant Hong Kong people a genuinely democratic electoral system, electing the chief executive in 2017, Chinese officials responsible for Hong Kong and Macau affairs also mentioned that national security is a concern.
So you're linking this back to the whole debate over universal suffrage, aren't you?
Well, the Chinese officials attempted to do this. It was raised as a reason, one of the rationalizations for denying Hong Kong people a genuinely democratic electoral system. And of course, during the deliberations period, there were also strong attacks on collusion between the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement and foreign forces, and as well as accusations of foreign interferences in the affairs of Hong Kong, using Hong Kong as a base of subversion.
Okay, we're discussing China's new national security law, and particularly the two references in China's new national security law to Hong Kong. Do email us with your thoughts, backchat@rthk.hk, or you can go to our Facebook page, Backchat on RTHK Radio Free, and leave a comment there. Let me just briefly bring in one comment that's already come in on our Facebook page from Henry. Says, I find the discussion on Hong Kong being included in China's national security law strange. As Hong Kong is part of China, logically, reasonably, constitutionally, mentioning Hong Kong in the law document is just natural. Actually, it does not matter if it's mentioned at all, but mentioning it this time makes it more comprehensive. Gladys Lee, barrister and member of HK2020. What do you make of these references in the national security law, and the point our listener making just now, saying that it's actually perfectly logical for Hong Kong as part of China to be referred to in this law? Gladys Lee? Can you hear?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that must be correct. Hong Kong is a part of China. But what I think is a matter of concern is what other newspapers have described as sweeping definitions. And in the China Daily itself, it's described as overarching legislation. Let me just tell you how national insecurity is defined. And I I do emphasize it's a concept of insecurity rather than security. It's defined as a condition in which a country's government sovereignty, unification, territorial integrity, well-being of its people, sustainable development of its economy and society, and other major interests, undefined, are relatively safe and not subject to internal and external threats. And then the spokesperson rejects the notion that the definition was too broad. I'd like to know what isn't included in that definition of national security.
Well, that's a very interesting point, isn't it? And I think we know that there are other very major pieces of legislation that ride on the back of or come in alongside this, one of which in China will have really swingeing implications for foreign NGOs that raise funds in China. Could you explain how that sits alongside this?
Well, I don't claim to have any particular insight into this, but I did listen with interest to Albert Ho's personal opinion that he's subject to some kind of stealth cloak when he goes into China, and that he isn't liable to be arrested, and that everything is going to be defined by whatever law is made under Article 23 here. Well, I don't see why he has that particular confidence.
So, sorry, we're still talking about the national security law here, I think.
We are, yes.
And you're referring to Albert Ho, you're referring to the legislator Albert Ho, right?
Yes, I am. I heard him this morning on the radio. I only caught part of what he was saying, but he seemed to think that Hong Kong, being a permanent resident of the Hong Kong SAR, confers some kind of stealth cloak that prevents us from being subject to the definition of national security.
Let's just clarify for our listeners. I mean, the point we're talking about here, isn't it, was the reports that started to emerge yesterday saying that even if this law doesn't directly apply in Hong Kong, people from Hong Kong who travel to the mainland could perhaps be arrested there and prosecuted for actions that they took in Hong Kong. Actions would include, of course, calling for independence in Hong Kong or the overthrow of the Chinese Communist Party.
I certainly think there is a risk, but let me give you one very, very concrete example, and this is before ever this national security legislation was passed. When the when the law was enacted in Hong Kong relating to surveillance by agencies, law enforcement agencies in Hong Kong, when it was revealed that for years and years and years there had been illegal and unlawful interference with communications of Hong Kong citizens. The Margaret Ng and other legislators raised specifically the question of intelligence gathering by mainland agents in Hong Kong. Now, there is absolutely nothing which relates to collection of information by whatever means by mainland agents, including presumably public security agents. So we already have a situation where national security does impact on Hong Kong even before this legislation was passed.
I think Lawrence Marr wanted to come back, didn't you?
Just on that point about whether Hong Kong people, if contravened this law in Hong Kong, would be liable for prosecution in mainland. If you read Article 74, it starts by saying the heading goes to civilian liabilities, public or citizens' liability. I think that the word citizen could well cover people who hold any Hong Kong SAR passport, because they are issued by the People's Republic of China.
So you're agreeing here? You're agreeing that people who commit actions in Hong Kong, which may be lawful under Hong Kong law, but are against this law, then when they go to China, they could potentially be liable for arrest in China for the actions they committed in Hong Kong?
I'm saying there is a possibility, but I'm not a mainland law expert. But by literal interpretation of Article 74, it covers citizens. So, I mean, by that token, could it mean Hong Kong citizens also cover? So, I'm not a mainland legal expert, so that issue is probably left to...
Professor Joseph Cheng?
Let me...
Yes.
In the first place, I would like to point out that the national security law, or the first version, was actually promulgated in 1993. The national security law, which has just been released, is a much revised version of the old national security law, which had its emphasis on anti-intelligence gathering activities. Now this is a much broader piece of legislation, and hence this is usually treated as a new piece of legislation. But one has to be reminded, as I said, there was a national security law already first promulgated in 1993, and in fact, local governments, including Shandong, Shanxi, Honan, Sichuan, they already introduced provincial legislation in the past few years, and there were other local governments, including Guangdong and so on, which had introduced local government regulations covering these aspects. Going back to Gladys' point, I think the most vulnerable groups in Hong Kong are those NGO people who have liaison, who have cooperation programs with genuine NGOs, not the governmental NGOs in China, because usually the funding comes from Western foundations, and some of these foundations' money may also come from Western governments. And I do believe that the labor groups are most vulnerable among them, because typically these Hong Kong NGO people and the mainland China NGO people, they may run joint programs. And some of these joint programs are funded by Western foundations.
On the subject of these, sorry to butt in there, on the subject of these NGOs, what is the thinking behind this clampdown on NGOs? Because many NGOs are, foreign ones in China, are doing great work, and this is really going to cause major setbacks.
Can I just say one point?
Let's let Professor Cheng finish first. We'll come back to Lawrence Marr. Yeah.
They are certainly vulnerable, and they certainly have been doing great work. There was a story going around in China that around 2006, when Putin was still in his, when Putin was president of Russia, he actually warned Hu Jintao at that time about the danger of foreign NGOs. And since then, the Chinese authorities have been paying a lot of attention to the activities of foreign NGOs. And as we all know, control over NGO activities in China has been much tightened in the past 2 years or so. And in the recent months, we have heard of crackdowns on NGOs, especially the labor NGOs in the Pearl River Delta.
But it's not just the labor NGOs. This will be UNICEF, all the children's charities, yes. Potentially a lot of the social service-orientated charities come under this.
They are treated differently. Labor NGOs are most vulnerable because they may be involved in the organization of strikes and industrial actions, which are most feared and concerned by the Chinese authorities. At the other end of the spectrum, environmental groups tend to be treated with perhaps the greatest degree of tolerance, because environmental protection is not perceived as a challenge to the regime and is supported by the regime to some extent.
Okay, Lawrence Marr, you wanted to come back?
I just agree that I think labor group would be more vulnerable, whereas groups like the Red Cross, the Scouts, those or NGOs would probably not be susceptible to these sort of dangers.
I disagree entirely. They're undergoing scrutiny at the moment. If you keep up with this, they are going through offices in Beijing with a fine-tooth comb, interviewing even the most junior recent members of staff.
Of which organisation?
Big charities. I don't want to name names, but there's a lot of them having a problem.
We'll obviously have to do a show, another show when this new law comes in as well. Gladys Lee, we've managed to spend 25 minutes so far on this show. We haven't mentioned Article 23 at all, which must win us some sort of prize, actually. More seriously, though, I mean, what if any implications do you see from this new law for Article 23 legislation in Hong Kong?
Well, strictly speaking, the areas on which Hong Kong is required to legislate under Article 23 are more clearly defined, if I can put it that way, than what and that it does not require a national security law as such. It only requires that we enact laws on our own to prohibit various acts, and they're treason, secession, sedition, subversion against the central people's government, or theft of state secrets, and then prohibiting foreign political organizations or bodies from conducting political activities in the region. So there's nothing as broad or sweeping as the definition of national security. And I think it's a terrible mistake to assume that we need to enact a single law called a national security law. This is not what Article 23 says.
But are you reassured when you hear the Chief Executive saying, well, he's got no plans in his present term to put forward Article 23 legislation?
Not particularly, because I think what we're looking at is the overall implication of the national security legislation on the mainland. And I think the assumption is not correct if we assume that doesn't affect the Hong Kong SAR at all.
I mean, of course, one interpretation of the references to Hong Kong in the national security legislation in the mainland is it's a message to Hong Kong. Why on earth have you still not enacted it's so many years after the basic law came into effect, you still haven't complied with your obligation under Article 23?
Well, except that I think it's wrong to ignore the fact that we do have laws governing treason, sedition, and theft of state secrets. So I think various areas of Hong Kong laws already cover those aspects. Whether they need to be amended is another matter.
So what would Article 23 in real terms actually change?
I think it's really an attitude to what constitutes prohibited acts of secession and sedition. I mean, what exactly is sedition? Because I think looking at the colonial laws on sedition, I think many people considered that they were already too broad and were unjustifiable infringements of free speech and political expression.
Lawrence Ma, is there a message in this national security, in the references to Hong Kong in this national security law? Is there a message to us on Article 23? After all, Macau's had an Article 23 law for many years now.
Well, I think it is...
Lawrence Ma first.
I think it acts as a reminder to reinstate our obligation to enact Article 23. With respect to what Gladys has just said, I think she is right to the extent that there are existing colonial legislation to the effect, but many of them are dated, and they're not. Many of them is against Her Majesty, and not the government, central government, for example. Under Section 9 of the Crimes Ordinance with respect to seditious intention, as long as you point out errors or defects in the government or the Constitution, then you are exempted from seditious intention prosecution. So, for example, if you oppose the existence of Article 1 of the Basic Law, which says that Hong Kong is part of the People's Republic of China, an inalienable part of the People's Republic of China, then on promoting independence, then you still won't be able to be prosecuted under Section 9.
Are you saying, so we're coming up to the news, but are you saying China should be quite happy with the existing laws we've got in the Crimes Ordinance, and there's no need for new Article 23 laws?
No, definitely the reverse, because I'm saying Article 9 is a teethless tiger. It has provided too many exemptions.
Okay, we'll pick up on that after the news. We're talking about China's new national security law, which mentions Hong Kong twice. It's the first time that a law of this kind has mentioned Hong Kong. What are the implications of that? As you just heard Lawrence Ma talking about, are there any implications in terms of enactment of Article 23? Later on in the programme, we'll be talking to legislators Claudia Mo from the Civic Party. Just why was she excluded from the handover celebration, the celebrations on July the 1st? The weather forecast, mainly fine. Very hot during the day with a maximum temperature around 33 degrees. And it's going to continue hot tomorrow, although the weather will gradually become unsettled after that. Temperatures currently 29 degrees. Relative humidity is 83%. We'll be back in 3 minutes.
Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 crashed in Ukrainian territory held by pro-Russian separatists. You're listening to the news on RTHK.
Welcome back to Backchat. I'm Danny Gittings. Your co-host this morning is Anna Fenton. I should mention that this is also the last Backchat of the season. We'll be taking a break as of next week through to the end of August, as Backchat normally does over the summer. The main topic today, we're discussing China's new national security law. Our guest in this main segment of discussion, Gladys Lee, who is barrister and member of HK2020, Professor Joseph Cheng, the convener for the Alliance for True Democracy and recently retired from the Department of Public and Social Administration at City University of Hong Kong, Lawrence Ma, barrister and chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation, and we're also now joined on the line by Professor Simon Young. Professor Simon Young is the Associate Dean for Research at the Faculty of Law at the University of Hong Kong. And in the interest of full disclosure here, I should add he is also my PhD supervisor. Professor Young, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Now, we've been talking about China's national security law. How do you see the implications of this law for Hong Kong, both in terms of the law itself and any possible implications for Article 23 legislation?
Right. I think I just want to make 3 points about this law. The first thing is there's been some question about whether this national security law applies to Hong Kong. And the answer, I think, quite clearly is that it does. It does purport to confer wide jurisdiction, including extraterritorial jurisdiction, and so that includes Hong Kong. But that's different from saying that you can enforce that law in Hong Kong. Right, you cannot enforce this law in Hong Kong because of our separate legal system, and we don't have legislation to enforce this law. So that's the first point. The second point is that the question about does this confer criminal jurisdiction? And I think, as Lawrence pointed out earlier, it does not. When you look at the whole of this law, it's purporting to confer jurisdiction and not criminal jurisdiction. And that's why you need to go to another, the criminal law of PRC. What it does say is that if individuals or groups violate their duties, which are spelled out apparently in Chapter 6 of this new law, then you will be the subject of investigation. That's Article 13. Right? That's, I think, the real implication. It's conferring very wide jurisdiction, showing where it has interest in national security. And then if you don't comply with those duties, you're going to be subject to investigation. And that's where the other laws kick in. That's the third point, which is the Chinese criminal law. When one looks at the criminal law of the PRC, one sees immediately at Article 6 that this is a law that applies within the territory of the PRC, except as specially stipulated by law. So within the territory of the PRC, I would think includes Hong Kong, Macau. And within this law itself, you find the definitions of offenses against both national security and public security, and also other offenses relating to the interests of national defense. And those offenses, of course, are very broad. And just to illustrate how broad these offenses are, one just looks at Article 105 of this criminal law, and there's an offense that if you instigate the subversion of the political power of the state and overthrow the socialist system through spreading rumors, slandering, or other ways, then that is a criminal offense. So what that means is that that law applies in Hong Kong. You just can't prosecute anyone in Hong Kong for that law.
But you can prosecute them if you arrest them in China.
Exactly. So if you were to get... So basically, if they want to go after you and you enter the territory of the mainland, on the face of this law, it seems like you could be subject to this law.
I think Professor Joseph Cheng wanted to come back on that.
One piece of information, upon the release of the national security law, the deputy chairwoman of the law committee of the Standing Committee of National People's Congress gave a press conference. And in the press conference, she indicated that, in principle, this national security law will not be applied to Hong Kong, and it is expected that Hong Kong will introduce its own local legislation to ensure the implementation of the principles, of the broad principles of the national security law. And as I pointed out earlier, that was actually the practice of provincial legislation in China with regard to national security legislation.
Now, of course... Sorry, go on.
Moreover, there seems to be a recent practice now that pro-democracy activists may be disallowed from entering China. So that may be one way of handling this issue. So any pro-democracy activist who has been advocating or using slogans such as termination of one-party rule, they may be refused entry into China, and that may be an easier way of dealing with the application of the law, with the possibility of arresting these pro-democracy activists inside China. So this may be one way of getting out of the dilemma on the part of the Chinese authorities.
But it's hard to escape the overall impression that if you come in from Mars and read all this, that Beijing is gently and not so gently hinting that we are, as a provincial government, expected to enact Article 23. So if we take that as a big, heavy-handed hint, when is it supposed to happen?
Well, the political community usually speculates that if Xi Leung gets his second term, then it will be one of his first priorities to promulgate Article 23 legislation, since Macau has already completed the task, and various Chinese academics associated with Hong Kong affairs in mainland China, they have been urging the Hong Kong authorities to fulfill this task as well.
Okay, we're discussing China's new national security law and the possible implications for Hong Kong. Let me just bring in comments from a couple of our listeners. Denny on our Facebook page saying there should be a difference between country and party. Should challenging the Communist Party be equated to challenging the Chinese government? The problem has always been how the law has been applied. The track record of mainland China has been using national security to silence dissidents. Moreover, in the case of Hong Kong and Macau, in Article 11 of the new national security law, are permanent residents who have foreign nationalities also responsible for the national security of China as well. And Mike in an email says, I find that as we discuss what might happen in courts in China with respect to a new China law, we have kept completely silent as to what happens and happens every day in respect of courts in Hong Kong. Some of the bizarre results from some judges, the lack of prosecution of various people. We have so much happening in Hong Kong. Where are the investigative journalists, our sacred cows? The courts need your attention. It is changing. Thank you very much. And if you do want to send us any comments, the email address backchat@rthk.hk, or you can go to our Facebook page, Backchat on RTHK Radio 3, and leave a comment there. Professor Young, picking up on what you said earlier, I'm just wondering, you said that people, if they venture onto the mainland, they can be prosecuted under this new law, or the more detailed, or through Chinese criminal law. Is the advice then to people who have participated in perhaps pro-independence activities in Hong Kong to stay out of the mainland if they're allowed to enter the mainland?
Well, I mean, it's a question of whether you violated this law. So if you feel that there's a risk, or probably I would think that if the mainland authorities were going to enforce this law against you, there would be some clear indications of that. And I think, as Joseph said, there could be one of two strategies. One is just to keep you out, but that strategy might change, and maybe they may well allow you to come in order to be prosecuted. But I would think that they would give you some kind of indication of that before it occurs, so that you would stay away.
So people who sort of just attended the June the 4th candlelit vigil, things like that, they shouldn't fear going into China on holidays under the new law?
Well, I wouldn't think that necessarily violates this law. And one has to study the law closely. But one would think that you would have to be doing something, as I read out earlier, subverting political power and overthrowing the socialist system. That sounds very broad, but I think they wouldn't probably, if it doesn't really affect their interests, I don't think they would bother.
Professor Young, given this inescapable reference to the PLA, which pops up again and again in this, given our position and this reference to increasing defence of overseas interests, do you think we're going to see the garrison in Hong Kong multiplied in size with a lot more big warships stationed here?
It's hard to say. I mean, one doesn't really know what the size is already. There's a lot of mystery about the garrison.
Well, if you look at night, you can see there's not many lights on.
But of course, whatever happens, it has to be governed by Hong Kong law and the garrison law. And so, one can't just sort of immediately jump to the conclusion that they're going to increase in size.
Lawrence Ma, how about this issue of the military presence in Hong Kong? Is there any implication of the national security law for that?
I don't think there is much of an interest of presenting arms in Hong Kong. There isn't too much of infrastructure of national interest, like oil tank lines and lifelines to be protected in Hong Kong.
Okay. And the issue I was asking Professor Young about just now, about if you are someone who has participated in, we do now have people participating in pro-independence activities in Hong Kong, but more commonly in activities calling for the overthrow of the Chinese Communist Party. Some of those people are not allowed to visit the mainland anyway, but others, for whatever reason, they still have home visit permits. Would you advise these people that they are at risk if they go to the mainland?
There is another aspect to this kind of business. So obviously you have to consider the security, the safety of the people, of the activists from Hong Kong going into China. But you also have to think about the security and the safety of those people inside mainland China whom you would like to contact. I usually, when I go to China, when I visit anyone, I normally notify these persons beforehand. If they feel safe to see me, of course I'd be happy to see them. But if they do not like to see me because seeing me or contacting me may get them into trouble, political troubles or legal troubles, then of course I would like to be informed so that I do not disturb them. Because if a pro-democracy activist or an NGO activist from Hong Kong visiting her counterparts in China, he or she may bring trouble to his or her counterparts in mainland China. So we have to consider that aspect as well.
You raise an interesting point there, but let's give Lawrence Ma a chance to come in on this issue of people who've been involved in activities in Hong Kong, visited the mainland. What would your advice be to them?
Simon is correct theoretically, because the law does cover have in personam extraterritorial jurisdiction. So if you try to overthrow the CCP in Hong Kong, if you go back to the mainland, you might be arrested. Joseph is also correct practically when he says that the government would not prosecute you. They would take away or confiscate your home return permit. I think both of them are right. So, I mean, for the time being...
You're saying that Professor Young's right in terms of the law, but Professor Cheng is right in terms of the practical situation.
Yes. Because after the November umbrella movement, those students were not prosecuted, and they were excluded from entering the mainland.
Oh, you raise a good point there, don't you? Several of the student leaders tried to enter the mainland, didn't they, at that time? And, I think one or two, some were actually stopped at airports inside China, but they were sent back rather than kept there.
Yes.
But the problem with what you're saying is as Professor Young's right on the legal situation, that you're basically dependent on the goodwill of the mainland authorities, that they won't change their practice in terms of...
And you probably have a genuine doubt, because after the enactment of this new national security law, whether they would have a change of prosecution policy. I don't know about that, but we've got to wait and see.
Could I just mention that this is also dependent on the assumption that the negotiations, I don't know what the state of negotiations are between the mainland and the Hong Kong SAR in relation to rendition of suspects who might have violated laws, I mean, in either jurisdiction, if I can put it that way. Will it be the case forever that a person in Hong Kong will not be returned to the mainland for prosecution in the mainland, particularly if it's regarded as a patriotic duty of the Hong Kong SAR government to return people to the mainland for prosecution if they have offended against national security legislation in Hong Kong?
Gladys Lee, you raise an interesting point there. We haven't discussed at all this side of the issue at all. Professor Young, would you like to say anything about the issues of a rendition agreement and the transfer of people to stand trial across the border?
Yeah, it's a real concern because given the sort of the extra mainland effect of the law that it applies in Hong Kong, if there was an agreement, then requests could be made from the central government to have people returned or surrendered for prosecution. But there's a real issue about the so-called double criminality rule. So these agreements normally come with a condition that the law has to exist on both sides. So one would have to look very carefully to see if we actually have that law, given that we haven't fully implemented Article 23. And
so presumably this kind of issue would just make it even more difficult to reach a rendition agreement. I mean, there's no sign of an agreement being ready anytime soon.
Well, the Secretary of Justice is in Beijing right now, so we'll have to see.
Lawrence Ma?
Yeah, I'm just reading Section 5 of the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance, Chapter 503. Subsection 1 requires that any offence of a political character, the court would not surrender that to the respective country. So in that regard, I would have thought that even the government would want to be patriotic on the say. The court, on reading on the strength of Section 5, would not allow the return or rendition of offenders of a political character.
Okay, thank you very much, Lawrence Ma. Sorry, is Joe Chen wanted to respond?
The very definition of patriotism is, of course, a very political issue, and the definition, unfortunately, is made by the Chinese authorities. And in this connection, I have to point out that the real issue here is that how do the Chinese authorities see their relationship with pro-democracy activists and with various types of civil society activists? If they see this relationship as a contradiction between enemies, then the Chinese authorities will, of course, adopt all types of measures, including legal measures, to limit the space of political activities of these activists. If, on the other hand, they see this as acceptable, tolerable within the limits of what they call contradictions among the people, and of course the Chinese authorities will adopt a more tolerant attitude as in the immediate years after the return of Hong Kong to the mainland China.
But we don't know because nobody's talking to each other.
Yes.
Professor Cheng, looking forward and more generally, are you optimistic, how pessimistic when you see these kinds of events, this kind of law in China? Is this long-term or short-term? People say maybe when Xi Jinping is a bit more secure in a few years' time, things will relax. Can you see any light on the horizon?
At the moment, we do not see indications of this kind. We certainly see a tightening of the entire political atmosphere. As we all know, there has been a crackdown on the activities of NGOs, of dissidents, of human rights lawyers in China, and there are all types of harassment. The anchor person just mentioned the harassment even of low-level executives of NGOs in China, because one of the simple ways of making their life difficult is to warn the landlords not to rent, not to let places for them to live and to work. And some of the political activists, the trade union activists in the Pearl River Delta simply could not operate because they could not rent an office, they could not rent accommodation for the staff members.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Joseph Cheng. It's been a very interesting discussion on China's new national security laws, or new national security law. Our guest in this discussion, Gladys Lee, barrister and member of HK2020. You just heard Professor Joseph Cheng, convener of the Alliance for True Democracy and a former professor at the Department of Public and Social Administration at the City University of Hong Kong. Also, Lawrence Ma, barrister and chairman of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation, and Professor Young. Professor Simon Young is the Associate Dean for Research at the Faculty of Law at the University of Hong Kong. Thank you very much indeed to our guests. Moving on, there were only 2 legislators excluded from the handover anniversary celebrations on Wednesday organised by the government. One was Lung Kwok Hung, who has, of course, sought to disrupt a number of these events in the past. The other, who, as far as I'm aware, hasn't tried to disrupt any of these events, was Civic Party legislator Claudia Mo, whose exclusion raised eyebrows. The government hasn't given any explanation. It said the Home Affairs Department said it would not comment on individual cases, and it drafts a list of guests according to the circumstances of each event. Well, joining us now to discuss whether she can throw any more light on her exclusion is Claudia Mo, legislator from the Civic Party. Good morning, Miss Mo.
Yes, morning. On that invitation, I need to clarify. Now, first of all, when I was asked whether I got the invite, I checked with my office staff. They said no such invite. And then I was asked by the South China Morning Post, you haven't got the invite to the cocktail reception either. And I understand the 2 invitations should be put together in an official invitation card, and it should have arrived via postal mail, right? I never got it, so never mind. I thought, what do I care? And then the reporter came back to me and said, the Home Affairs Department refused to comment on the case, on your case. So I thought, well, that's it, right? They've decided not to invite me. Never mind. Except yesterday afternoon, in a lump of junk mail, email, we found on the computer there was such an invitation. But how come I never got that official invitation card? Remains a mystery.
So you're saying there's some kind of mix-up, that you actually were invited but you didn't receive the invitation?
I don't know. I mean, we saw CY Leung yesterday afternoon. I thought he might say something about it, but he didn't. I didn't either, because I didn't care about that sort of invitation anyway. I was rather taken aback at first that he thought he put me in the same league as long hair. Not that I didn't find that as a compliment, right? Except...
Sorry, do you find that as a compliment or not?
No. I mean, what I'm saying is, yes, I would think it's a compliment. If,
it is a compliment.
I got
it's a very exclusive
put
club.
in the same league as long hair. But then how could he think that I was going to hoist a yellow umbrella or started shouting slogans at a cocktail reception? It's baffling, really.
But Claudia, if you got an email invitation, maybe they just went all eco-friendly this year and didn't send out any invitation cards.
I did check with other people. I never saw that email myself. But then I asked Alan Leung yesterday, did you get the invitation in the form of a proper card, as usual? He said, yes, of course. I never got it.
So, I mean,
very curious.
It's very curious, and there's some confusion here. If, however, they did deliberately decide to not send you the printed invitation, well, what's your supposition? As you say, you don't disrupt these events in the way that Longhair does. So, why would you be so honoured to be singled out? What's your best guess?
I suppose it would have been due to my involvement in this local consciousness campaign amongst the young. Because I and Gary Fan, the other legislator, formed this Hong Kong First movement, organization, sort of a two-man alliance 2 years ago. And I actually got named by CY Leung to be one of the starters or the campaign movers. So maybe, I don't know. I actually raised this question to CY Leung yesterday with the party people.
What did he say?
Him at his invite. Apparently, I'm not allowed to quote him. It's on that sort of basis, what they call the Chatham House law or something. But what I could say is he actually gave us some convoluted reply, which is completely illogical. But we were not there to conduct any debate with him, right? 4 of us, 30 minutes, never mind again.
Are you allowed to visit China, Miss Mo?
I'm in a rather curious situation. I do not have that, what do you call, hometown visit permit.
We'd always say home visit permit in English.
And not that I wasn't allowed, I didn't quite apply for one. What happened was my last one, that was long expired, right, was used for covering the Tiananmen massacre event back in 1989. I went into the mainland on that document, but I came back down to Hong Kong at the time using my British passport. So technically, I went in, I never came back out. And after that, I just decided I didn't know how to explain what happened.
Well, you're officially missing in action in the mainland, I assume.
I did go to China to do visits and things using a British passport visa before that. Before 2012. But after that...
But you can't hold a British passport now, can you?
Exactly. I had to give up my British passport in order to run, not to get elected, but to run in election first. So I did that back in 2008. And ever since, I haven't done anything about this home visit thing.
OK, thank you very much, Claudia Mo. That's legislator Claudia Mo from the Civic Party talking about the mystery of why she never received a printed invitation to the handover anniversary celebrations on Wednesday, although she now says she has discovered an email that puts the whole issue in a rather interesting light. Earlier on, we were, of course, talking about China's new national security laws as well. Thank you very much, Anna, for joining us on this last show before the summer break. As I mentioned earlier, Backchat always breaks over the summer, and we're doing so again this year. We will be back on Monday, August the 31st. I've been sitting in for Hugh Chiverton the last few weeks, but Hugh Chiverton will be back in the chair then. However, please do continue listening in to RTHK over the summer. Peter Lewis will be here with Biz Extra from 8:30 to 9, starting from Monday. He tells me he's going to put the fun side on business, and Phil Whelan will also be picking up his show early, starting from 9 o'clock. The weather forecast, mainly fine, very hot during the day with a maximum temperature around 33 degrees. Still be very hot tomorrow, but the weather will become unsettled gradually in the following couple of days. Temperature currently 29 degrees, relative humidity 83%. We'll be back on August the 31st.
Sometimes sounds are impressive. I hear the sounds of life. I hear the pulse of a vibrant city. Sometimes I hear noises that are annoying. But they can become a concerto when they're put together. Relish and listen with an open heart. You may realize what you hear. Respect different values. Embrace different voices.
The news with Samantha Butler.
The International Monetary Fund has highlighted the deteriorating state of the Greek economy, saying the country will need at least 50 billion euros to stabilise its finances. Malaysia has told the United Nations Security Council it wants to set up an international criminal tribunal to prosecute those suspected of having shot down a passenger jet over Ukraine last year. Nearly 300 people were killed last July when Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 crashed in Ukrainian territory held by pro-Russian separatists. And the death toll after a passenger ferry overturned in the central Philippines has risen to 38, with 20 people missing. Those are the headlines. I'll have the full stories at 10 o'clock.
It's time right now on Radio 3 to say good morning to Phil Whelan and his guests on The Morning Brew.
Hello. Hello. How are you? Not too bad.